Well, this looks like a MS361, but let's pan out a little farther. And if we look at this, that's a Chinesium cylinder and an aftermarket muffler that's been modified and an aftermarket gas tank and the wrong aftermarket carburetor and oh wow, you'll always know. They said if it's factory equipment, still puts their name on everything. You know, it's on like the end of the fuel line. It's on, I mean, you name it. Still has at least got a logo on here. I don't know, maybe. So here's what happened. Customer brought me this. You know, it would idle, and you know, and you fired it up, and then as it idled, the idle went way up and would die. So that's indicative of an air leak, but not to say that the carb couldn't be a factor in that. So what we're going to do is we're going to vacuum and pressure test this. So I've got a piece of rubber material in between the cylinder and the muffler, and that's tightened down. Let me hook up the rest of the stuff. I've got, you know, I just buy this in the plumbing aisle. They're like 6x6 tiles of this rubber, and you know, just do these as a template so I can roll that in there, put the carb on there, block it off, and then at least on this one there's an impulse line right there, and we'll be able to vacuum and pressure test. Sit tight. Okay, there's a ton of aftermarket kit chainsaws that you can buy. There's a ton of aftermarket parts that you can buy. Some of them are okay, but it's not worth it. And this is a disclaimer. If you're handy and you like to tinker with stuff, by all means, I think that's for you. If you're not handy and can't tinker, you should run far away from something like this. Now, I forgot to mention there's also an aftermarket ignition coil on here. The piece of fuel line that connects the crankcase to the carburetor was not hooked up. I reached down in there. The rubber line is harder than woodpecker lips. So, its natural shape and bend is there from, years of being where it was. But, it's lost its rubbery grip. So I guess it came off the little nipple where it plugs into. So that would be a reason why it wasn't getting a signal. So how that works, and I've explained this in other videos, when the piston goes up, a vacuum is created in the crankcase. And then when the piston comes down, pressure. Okay? So that fuel hose takes that vacuum pressure, thump, 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 and then translates it to the carburetor, which goes, that impulse line goes to the fuel pump side diaphragm of the carburetor. So every time it goes up and down, it's thump, 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 just like the engine's going thump, thump, thump. Engine goes faster, more thumps, carburetor, more thumps. So without that signal, all it's doing is just trying to pull air through the carburetor and get it to kind of seep fuel. So you're not going to get accurate whatever. So let's vacuum and pressure test this. It's all blocked off. It wouldn't surprise me at all if this doesn't make, oh, duh. You big dummy. This spark plug says savior. I don't think this is a savior for this. This thing's just polluted with aftermarket parts. So from my standpoint is it just everything's suspect. And obviously this wasn't a running saw at some point. Somebody threw the Chinese parts cannon at it. Well, it's starting to pump up. Let's go a little farther. Let's see how it goes. Oh, not so much. It's bleeding down. This is like the important part. This little thing right here is like a meter to an electrician. You know, you can't really get to the bottom of what's going on. That's bled all the way down. There's like a pound of pressure left in here. So let's tear it apart a little bit more and find out where it's leaking from, because everything's suspect. Okay, it gets better. So that rim sprocket says 404. I'm pretty sure there wasn't 404 chain on this. Somebody was trying to run. Yeah, that thing's pretty chewed up. The spacing is different because the chain is bigger. This should run 3/8 pitch chain. So just real quick, what's pitch of chain? The pitch of the chain is actually like we'll call it like the chassis size. So this is 404 chain right here, and you'll notice that this tooth, this driver, and this driver are slightly farther apart than these drivers, just because the chassis of the chain is larger. So obviously, trying to run the wrong pitch chain with the wrong size sprocket, it's going to make a lot of clatter because it doesn't match. You know, these are supposed to be like cogs in a wheel, and then you get what I'm saying. But to overcomplicate this, so basically it's the pitch is, if you were to do center to center on this, measure that, and then divide it in half, that's 0.404 of an inch. And this is 375 or 3/8 of an inch. Center to center, 3 rivets divided by 2. Well, that didn't take long to find. We're almost doing this in real time right now. You know, I just know, you know, with the age of this crankcase, that more than likely, you know, with the heat, you know, your clutch is right here, and you can tell by some of the discoloring. I mean, even if you don't run your saw hard, you're going to create a lot of heat, and this seal's more than likely the first one to fail. You know, so if I pump this up, you can just see it's leaking like a sieve. And if we clear some of this out of here, this obviously hasn't run long since somebody threw a bunch of Chinese parts at it. Oil Pumps factory and the Worm Gears factory, if I can get that to focus, you can actually see where it says Steel. Again, Steel puts their name and Husky puts their name on every single little part. Let me get this cleared up. I think I saw an aftermarket crankcase seal on here, and let's see if they just installed it wrong or there's other reasons. Let's see. I don't feel any play in the crankshaft, so it's stable. Okay, it's definitely leaking at the seal. So if we can, oh, by the way, get the nicest pair of snap ring pliers. Look how easy this is. Whoops, I missed. So, and look, it actually holds on to it. You know, those multi-kit things, I mean, they're terrible. Let's see if I can get this to focus. You'll notice that the prongs are pointed outward. You know, this is a Mac Tools snap ring, and I'm not big about buying tools off the truck, but sometimes there's just no good option. If we look at this seal right here, this is definitely an aftermarket seal. It should be blue if it was, you know, an OEM seal. So somebody's already tried to fix this. And, you know, if they didn't get over that ring, but it does look pretty crusty. I didn't notice any leaking right here. Okay, the bearing doesn't look too terribly bad. I extracted the seal out of there. I'm going to get this tidied up, covered up. I do not have a seal for 361, so I'm going to order some seals. But, you know, I can't find out if there's any other air leaks until I get that plug. So we're going to have to do a follow-up. I'll get some parts on the way. And one more thing before I wrap this up. This seal is really hard. That feels more like plastic than it does rubber. Okay, so to wrap this up, we'll do a follow-up video on this. I have no idea how this is going to run. You know, you don't get the same performance out of aftermarket cylinders. The port timing's not as good. When I took the spark plug out to look inside the cylinder, the exhaust ports not too terribly smooth. There's some kind of jagged edges. I didn't see any scoring on the piston, so, but I feel like after we get that seal replaced, I'm probably going to buy both sets, or both sides of the crankcase, and then we can repressurize it, you know, on the follow-up video. But, you know, I'm telling you, if you're not handy, stay away from the aftermarket stuff. You know, I mean, you have to like to tinker to do that. Yeah, they're dirt cheap. Yes, you're going to have to revisit things. You know, I only use the OEM products because most of my customers are commercial. So, you know, it's more about dependability than it is cost. You know, that saw is more valuable if it can crank up and run every day on the job site and not give any problems. Whether, you know, this can just be some fun kicking around saw, or, you know, after running it, it seems like everything's okay. I will probably try and find a spare carburetor for this that actually fits. Yes, you can run, this is like an 044, 046 carburetor. Yes, you can. But, you know, the IntelliCarb boot that plugs up to this, that helps aid and assist, you know, with throttle acceleration and everything else, the throttle response, you know, is going to be ineffective because it's the wrong carb for the saw. All right, enough about all of that. So yeah, I guess we'll name this one the aftermarket parts cannon. You know, there's no dogs on here either. I mean, just what a disaster. I have no idea what possessed Daniel to buy this. I'm sure it was a good deal.